I am so excited today to be interviewing Nilofer Merchant. She's a good friend of mine and also has gone from being an admin assistant to CEO to now serving on the board of a publicly traded organization. She's worked for big brands like Apple and has also had her own company, but also works with a lot of other big brands you guys would recognize like Logitech, Symantec, HP, VMware. And it's really fun to spend time with her because we usually go on a hike. So this is the first time we've actually sat down. And then she gives me tons of free strategic advice that I go back and apply. So every minute with Nilofer is insightful. And I want to kick off with a question because you refer to yourself as the James Bond of innovation. And I want to find out where you got that moniker from. And
so people would always say, well, how do you manage to do this stuff of knowing models and knowing people and knowing leadership, and how do you do that? You're like the Swiss Army knife, or you're like the MacGyver, or you're like, and people would keep sticking different descriptions in. And somebody said James Bond of innovation, and I said Jane Bond, right? Because they're just, we don't celebrate enough women.
I agree.
And how much women actually can contribute to the economy, and so I just like the humor of that, and it stuck.
That's awesome. So whenever I've written a book, I learn a lot. I learn new things, undiscovered things, because it forces you to kind of bring together everything that's been swirling in your mind.
Well, yeah, because you hear yourself think, right? Yeah.
Right. Well, you have to commit it to paper too. Yeah. What was the biggest thing that you learned, or the biggest insight that you pulled away from this book? Pulled into the book, I guess.
Yeah, pulled into the book, kind of found out of me, right? Mm-hmm. So one of the ideas that I wrote about in the book is about how purpose can be so much bigger than just this sort of stuff we use to kind of communicate how good we are. But it can actually be the key ingredient from which we create. Because who we are is what we make. Yeah. And more importantly than who we are is what is it we believe. Because when we work from a place of belief, then I don't need to tell you what to do. Because we have shared belief. Yeah. And you understand why we're here. And as soon as you understand why we're here, I don't need to decide strategy with you, because you could decide strategy to go figure out what's right for your business. And I'd always understood that at some level, but in all the last 40 years of writing, and other people have done, they treat purpose like the frosting on the cupcake. And I realized it was actually the cake.
Is that why? Like, your book's the first one I've ever seen that opened with an obituary. It's obituary to strategy. And that was interesting to me. Is that kind of where that comes from?
Yeah, so I was sitting in a board meeting. So I'm actually interviewing for a number of Fortune 500 board seats. And interviewing is probably the wrong word, but sort of like checking them out, and they're checking me out. And I just said for a couple of these, well, I'm not sure if I know enough about what you guys are working on that I would like to sit in and just observe. And in one of these board meetings, so I'm not going to tell you the company because it's an embarrassing story in this sense, this chairman's going on and on about core focus and strategic advantage and just about if I had a buzzword bingo thing, I could have won really fast. And yet I realized that what they were really doing was trying to build like a bigger and bigger moat around their organization instead of trying to figure out how to get the drawbridge down and figure out how to work with many other people. And they had bought into this notion that there was this perimeter of an organization. It's us, and then there's customers out there. Yeah. And I'm sitting in this, and I have this, you know this actually about me. I have this pretty sharp tongue when I want to use it, and in order to...
I have a sharp tongue and a look.
Yes, I have all those. So to manage myself, I do this doodling thing where I just like write it for myself instead of look at anybody, because I'm afraid they're going to know how much I'm judging them or something. And so I sat there and I wrote, these ideas are dead. And I just started writing this list. And like one of the ideas is sustainable advantages, because the way it's often referred to and has been taught now for 40 or 50 years is you can have a 40-year advantage.
Not anymore.
And there's actually research that says that number has gone down to at least 15, if not 5 in the tech sector. Yeah. And yet so many organizations are still thinking, well, it's ours and we got to protect it. And I'm like, actually, your job is to figure out how to leap from opportunity to opportunity, right? And it's a very different metaphor. And so when I started doing this doodling thing, I actually thought somebody else must have written this idea already. And so I came back and I was actually Googling all these people and saying, like, they must have written it, and all I want is, I want to be right to this guy. Of course, you know me well enough to know that I want to be right. But I was like, somebody else has already had this idea, I'm sure of it, and I will find it and I will send it to this person so they can know, and I will feel good about helping them know more. And nobody had written it, and it struck me like, somebody needs to help these 800-pound gorillas understand how to act more like 800 gazelles, nimble, agile, not because we go faster and try to work harder, but because from our very core, we understand how to decentralize
and
power.
I love that concept. That's actually my next question is the contrast between an 800-pound gorilla and a gazelle, because that's what you were challenging me on our walk. You're like, no, split it all up, move it all around. I'm like, ah. And it was interesting to me.
It's a federated concept. So most organizations are trying to think, people should be in their same building because then we'll have more collaboration, and we should have we think about centralized. And I'm asking people to think about federated. How do you allow as little to belong into a central place? What do you need to have? So much nuclear power kind of thing, so that the federation can feel that power and do what they need to do next to their customer, next to their market, in relationship with people, rather than back inside some walled off perimeter.
So frightening to me. Like when I first read the concept and then when we talked about it, I was like, not because I don't consider myself like a control freak, but does this model work for every organization? I mean, is it really the model for everyone, or do you think there's different models for different businesses?
So, I make this point in the book too, that I write an obituary for this character called traditional strategy, and I'm doing that. But I do make the point that there is a place in the world for an Exxon, because obviously with capital equipment costs, there's a real leverage, right? And with McDonald's, with their kind of scale, there's a certain kind of scale. And all I'm suggesting is that there's many ways to scale today. And scale used to be a direct function of size, because you could control supplier cost, you could have better pricing, and that drove your profits. And today scale can happen about how we work with other parties. And I'll just drop a couple of examples just so we can kind of look at it in practice. TED, which is a well-known brand, used to have a conference that was 2,000 people. Fantastic conference, right? But only 2,000 people really experienced it. And then they said, well, what if we allowed it to go online? And then what if we allowed other people to create content instead of just us? And I think they sort of thought, 5 people, maybe 10 people. And now the TEDx brand is as big, if not bigger in many ways, right, as the
thousands
TED brand.
and thousands of conferences.
It's because of the shared purpose, though. They have 3,500 events that have happened in the last 3 years. Shared purpose. These people actually understand that the ideas that matter to them in their local community are incredibly important, and then they evangelize those and figure out how to get the right people to articulate those ideas. And let's face it, the ideas that are outside the slums in Kenya are different than the ones you're going to find in Long Beach, and they should be. But we can have a shared platform that will allow all those ideas to be seen, right? So it's not that everyone will play, but anyone can. That changes where power goes. And then how do you let a whole bunch of people co-create value with you?
Yeah, that's the scary part.
It's scary and yet so fantastic at the same time, because it means you no longer have to do it all yourselves. And then as a leader, you no longer have to know everything. And I mean, I know one of the things that's happening inside all these Fortune 500 companies is the leader who still believes they need to be the keeper of the strategy. And I'm like, no, you need to be the keeper of the flame. Be more like the ember and let people come, light against that ember, and they'll carry that light much further out into the world. And when they do that, ember doesn't take much energy. It's almost self-perpetuating. Keeper of the strategy means everyone has to check in with you about everything. It's exhausting. You'll never be done.
Yeah, that's interesting. So how would you describe how to shift? This is a big shift. And what do you think the biggest barriers are to make this transition?
Well, one of the things I've done in the book is just to say, don't view this as, is this right or wrong? Because I think that's actually a false, sometimes we do that, we frame something as, well, that won't work for us, or that won't scale enough, right?
I went straight there.
And what I'm actually saying is, okay, why not sit down and say, what about this makes sense for us? What could we try and experiment with? What do we do to approach all this new stuff? And instead of saying, there's this set of ideas and they're scary to us, to go, what part of this could really become an advantage for us? Is it about community? Is it about knowing our purpose more so that we can decentralize power and have us go faster? Is it about actually becoming more clear even about what our true purpose is so we can have many people carrying on that? That's there's a whole set of questions I pose in the book in the very last chapter, just 3 really logical sort of sets of questions that people can then use as sort of a working exercise. And I'm not even suggesting it's right for everyone. I'm actually asking you to figure out, what could it be for you? Because I point out 9 different examples that are sort of counterintuitive. People say that all the time about this book. It's counterintuitive.
Yeah, it is.
Everything we've been taught about business, the rules in the social era are quite different. And so it's trying to figure out, what does it need to look like for you? And from that place, a different kind of advantage will come.
Can you turn someone that's been a strategic leader into someone who's now a flame keeper? I mean, it's a completely different mindset and persona for something like that.
It is. I think it's a really scary one for some. But let me give you the let me tell you what the risk is. Actually, let me say it this way. So we see HP today out in the tech industry. They've laid off 120,000 people in 5 years. Think about that for a second and the implication of it. And they keep saying, gosh, we have to work on our strategy.
Yeah.
IBM, in comparison, has continued to grow. And I'm not sure if you know this, but in the last few weeks, they hit the highest stock valuation of their entire 100-plus year history.
Isn't that something?
Yeah.
Yeah. I've
They're
been
not
studying
laying
both
people
HP
off.
and IBM for the next book. Yeah, it's very interesting.
And they're not laying people off. And here's what they're actually doing is they're saying, how can we federate decisions? How can we have our customers co-create with us? And then their projects, because they invited me to come speak with them, and I shared with them a framework for how to think about scale, or how to think about meaning, and how to think about community. And they went, that's Green Planet, Smarter Planet, that's Watson. They filled out the rest of the grid. And then on one of the grids, they said, this one part, they go, we don't have anything for that. We've probably not been allowing ourselves to go there.
Wow.
And they said it themselves. And to me, that was such a sign of what IBM's doing right.
Yeah.
Again, not about my framework, about what could we do?
Well, they feel safe saying we're flawed, there's this gap.
And learning, and saying,
cool.
what else could we do? Because as soon as you're confident and faithful enough that you can learn, then you trust and you experiment and you do learn.
Yeah.
And it's that shift from, I'm a scaredy cat and I'm going to put up these big walls to
protect my fiefdom and
breathe it out, right? Life has changed.
Life has changed. I love this talk. Thank you for coming. And again, pick up her book, The 11 Rules for Creating Value in the Social Era. You can get it at hbr.com and on Amazon and
Absolutely.
anywhere
and Apple,
you
the
can
Apple
get.
iStore.
Oh, and Apple too. So on iTunes.
I guess it's the book version of
the book
Apple Store.
version on apple.com. So thank you for coming in.
Thank you.